Hey fellow nerds, if you were to travel back in time to pre-Mauryan era and if you were to ask a local priest where the nearest temple is, he would look at you and judge you.
That's because I wouldn't be able to speak their language.
Now, even if you had a machine that could translate everything you said,
What?
a post-Maurya text dating to probably around 1st century CE called Vishnu Smriti states that Vedic recitations should not be allowed in temples, in crossroads, and in cemetery. What's more is that the priests that attended these temples were called Devlakas, and they were likened more to butchers and physicians. But there is no mention of how to establish temples in the Dharmashastras, which are law books that were printed around this in between Maurya and Gupta Empire time.
Well, if the temples weren't important back then how did people practice their religion?
The Vedic religion was a highly personal one. People may or may not have had their own personal clay murtis that they used to depict gods, but for any auspicious occasions or for wishing anything great in their life, they had to call their local Brahmin to perform a yajna.
So, if there are mentions of temples before the Gupta period, then what were they used for if not for prayers?
There are two interpretations that historians have to this. One possibility is that they were places that traveling ascetics used to stay at. There were shrines where these travelers used to find refuge and protection from the gods. The primary evidence for this is Vashisht Dharmasutra, which mentions temples alongside places where most ascetics would have stayed at, like outskirts of villages, under tree shades, and abandoned houses. I mean, one of the two structures that the Buddhists used to build were the vihars, which used to house the monks. Why wouldn't Hindus do the same for theirs? But that's the boring answer, because the other answer is far more interesting. The word used to describe temples in these texts is not temples, of course. But it's not mandir either, it's devalaya, which means house of gods, which means that it was sacred to someone. Samudragupta, the second emperor of the Gupta dynasty, built a temple depicting the Varaha avatar of Vishnu in Iran, Madhya Pradesh, along with donating a humanoid Vishnu idol to the temple. Now, if the process of consecrating temples as holy sites started being the case in Gupta Empire, why would the second emperor perform it? Because it might not be the oldest temple at all. This is Mundeshwar temple in Bihar. Its current version was expanded and renovated around 11th to 12th century AD, but its inner sanctum or the closest area is probably constructed around 5 to 600 AD during the Gupta. But during a very recent ASI survey, they found that the innermost sanctum of this temple is constructed in a style that is, and ASI puts that date to around 108 AD. At that point, the Brahmins were staunchly against the construction of temples, and the kings didn't patronize them either. Kautilya or Chanakya's Arthashastra mentions the existence of temples. It doesn't describe them in reverence or urges the state to build them. Instead, he describes them being the part of a town of temples in the outskirts of bigger towns. Similarly, a 2nd century BC text called the Mahasabhya of Patanjali describes the temple of the god of wealth Kuber and the temples of Ram and Keshava or Krishna. Even the Valmiki Ramayana mentions the existence of temples in Ayodhya. Now, the version of Ramayana we have today is in no way indicative of the time of Ram, because it was written way after whenever this supposed event happened. Nor can it give an insight into the time that it was first compiled in, which should be around 6th-7th century BC, because from the quality of Sanskrit written, we can summarize that people added more to Ramayana after the time of Valmiki. But additions to Ramayana and Mahabharata stopped around the time that the Purans were starting to be written, around 2nd century AD or a little before the Gupta Empire's ascension. So at the very least, temples have existed according to Ramayana way before Gupta Empire's ascension. These are all the facts we know. But from here on is my theory. If we put together all these facts, the fact that the temples were looked down upon by Brahmins, nor were they patronized by Kshatriya kings until Gupta Empire, and they possibly have existed since before Mauryan Empire, could mean only one thing. These temples were built by commoners, probably built outside of city limits as to not disturb people in power. But they were a way for the common folk to circumvent the hegemony of the priest class and reach God directly. And of course, they were probably used to house ascetics as well. It was kind of like how the Protestant reformations were like to Christians, a way to circumvent the Pope and the clergy and reach God directly. Now, this temple building could have started after the Buddhists started doing the same themselves, because people who didn't want to turn into Buddhists also wanted this aspect of religion in their Vedic traditions. Or it could be an older tradition. We found some idols related to female deities that date back to the Indus Valley civilization, and we have even found seals that some historians insist looks like Shiva. Your interpretation may vary. We have found many fire altars where the people used to worship fire, and because of that, some people even speculate the famous bathhouse of Harappa was probably also a holy site that they used to worship water. And then for some reason, Gupta Empire started to patronize idol worship and temple building, being the first empire to do so. This slowly legitimized temple building, and it became the primary way of worship for Hindus. Sort of how the Holy Roman Empire or the Central European kingdoms adopted Protestantism first, legitimizing it. And for the Hindus, this allowed for the places of worship that the common people used to attend to become far more intricate than they had ever been. On top of this, the earliest of the Purans are probably written around this time. The earliest of them mention the Mauryas, the Shungas, and even the Satavahanas, meaning that they can't have come so late that these empires were forgotten to time, but they can't have come earlier than the end of the Satavahana Empire or towards its end. By the time of the Muslim invasions, Ashoka was only considered to be a mythical figure, so it has to be before that point. And also Gupta Empire is not mentioned in the earliest one, so it was probably around the rise of Gupta Empire or probably even predates it. The Purans borrowed heavily from folk traditions and folk stories. In fact, they are believed to have married the Vedic tradition and Upanishadic ideas with the folk religion of India. This meant that some people could achieve moksha or enlightenment through listening to these stories, and even if they weren't able to do it, they could get a glimpse into the history of the land or learn more about the lore of their religion, or at worst they learned the life lesson. More importantly, it helped the scholars create a canon of a forever shifting and forever evolving packet of religions. Sanskrit was having a revival of sorts. From the inscriptions that we can see from Gupta era and a little bit before it, we see Sanskrit based inscriptions, not local Prakrit based inscriptions like from the time of Ashoka. Credible universities such as Takshashila and Nalanda took shape during this time, which allowed for there to be more scholarship and more study of science and philosophy. Great poets such as Kalidasa, Harisena and Sudasa created works that have stood the test of time.
Great victory, isn't it? People can approach religion and spirituality the way they want, and there is a great spread of culture that happens during this time. It must have been great to live during the Gupta era.
Not really.
Why?
You see, the caste system had rigidified around the time of Gupta Empire, and women had been given lesser positions.
Wait, why?
Well, to find out, watch the next week's video.